They always said that certain shadows don't belong to houses, but to people. That some presences aren't trapped in old walls or hidden in forgotten closets, but choose a bloodline, a lineage, a memory that spans generations. This family's case began long before any of them were born, although no one could explain how an invisible curse, carried in silence, managed to accompany 3 entire generations as if it were an inherent part of life itself. He was the first to tell the story, not because he was the bravest, but because he was the only one who could still sleep some nights without hearing footsteps in the hallway. His voice trembled as he described the phenomenon, not from recent fear, but from the accumulated exhaustion of a lifetime trying to convince himself that what haunted his grandfather and destroyed his father wasn't now haunting his own house. The recorded beginning of this story dates back to a small farm in the 1950s, when his grandfather first woke up with the feeling that someone was standing at the foot of his bed watching him. It wasn't a dream, it wasn't paralysis, it wasn't his imagination. The whole family had similar accounts: the icy touch on the door, the sound of fingernails dragging on the wall, the hunched figure near the barn. But at the time, everyone attributed it to stress, isolation, the mind playing tricks on them. Until the night his grandfather found deep marks in the bedroom wood, as if something had spent the entire night trying to get in. He never spoke about it in detail. He just locked the door tighter and started sleeping with a knife beside his bed. It didn't help. The following morning, he woke up with the knife on the floor, the window open, and the damp smell of earth inside the room, as if someone or something had been there. When his father was born decades later, the presence was already part of whispered conversations among the adults. The family called it the thing because they never dared to name what they saw. He heard his grandmother recount that at age 6, his father woke up with fine marks on his back, like scratches, but made by something that seemed to have fingers that were too long. Doctors said they were allergies, dermatitis, nocturnal nervous breakdowns. But no one could explain how a 6-year-old boy always woke up at 3 in the morning, crying so hard that it seemed he wasn't crying from fear, but from recognition. As if he knew what was watching him, as if he had seen that presence before. This cycle continued for years. Dad grew up, moved house, moved city, changed his life, but the presence kept coming, always discreet, always silent, always patient. He said that even as an adult, he felt a shadow lowering itself in the corner of the room, as if bending its own body in a way that was impossible for any human being. And always at the same time, always in the same place in the house, always with the same smell, a smell of wet wood, old earth, and something reminiscent of iron. When his father tried to ignore it, the entity became bolder. Doors opened by themselves, lights flickered rhythmically, objects moved a few centimeters as if pushed by invisible fingers. At the end of his life, he no longer spoke of the matter. He simply left a glass of water by the door, a habit that no one understood, but which seemed to calm him. And then it was his turn. The 3rd generation. A man who grew up hearing stories that should have been just legends, but which little by little began to repeat themselves around him like a play written long before he was born. The first time was when he woke up and saw the bedroom door open, not wide open, but ajar enough to create a perfect gap of darkness. And, for a frozen second, he saw a silhouette standing there. Tall, thin, with its neck tilted to the side, like someone observing for minutes before calling. He blinked, and the image disappeared. But the feeling remained, as did the smell of damp earth that lingered in the air for days, clinging to the sheets, sticking to the clothes, seeping into the cracks of the wooden bed. He began searching for answers, rummaging through old letters, talking to relatives who preferred silence, and revisiting places where his father and grandfather said they had first seen the figure, and that's when he realized the truth. The presence was never confined to a specific place. It followed only one rule, always accompanying the youngest member of the family old. Enough to perceive its existence. It was as if the entity awaited the exact moment when the mind became capable of understanding it, as if each generation were a new page for it to continue writing. He understood, with a deep shiver, that the thing wasn't haunting a family. It was following a cycle, and now it was his turn. He said that, after accepting that the presence now accompanied him, the house began to behave like a living organism, breathing along with his fears, reacting to his emotions, and shaping the night around the tension he tried to hide. At first, they were small details, easy to ignore. The sound of wood creaking in the hallway, as if someone were walking on the old floor, the closet door opening a few centimeters even when locked, the lamp flickering at precise intervals, as if trying to communicate with a code he couldn't decipher. But, as the days passed, the presence became bolder, more constant, more intimate. He began to notice that at certain hours of the night, the room became inexplicably colder, as if someone had opened all the windows, even when they were locked. The sheet would get cold in a way that didn't seem natural, as if an invisible hand had slid across the fabric seconds before. It was during one of those early mornings that he felt the first real touch. He had slept on his side, his arm close to his chest, trying to stay awake for fear of finding the hallway too quiet. But exhaustion won. He fell asleep, and, in the middle of a fragmented dream, he felt a gentle pressure on his forearm, like when someone tries to wake you delicately. When he opened his eyes, the room was dark, but not completely. There was a hunched shadow near the bed, not tall like the one he had seen in the doorway, but lower, more compact, as if kneeling. He remained motionless, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it was shaking his ribs. The figure rose slowly, as if it knew that any sudden movement could break something inside him, and retreated to the corner of the room. It didn't disappear, it simply withdrew, waiting. For days, he tried to convince himself that he was imagining it all. But then he began to hear the same sound his father described when he was alive. 3 light knocks on the door, always at 1:03, 2:03, 3:03 in the morning. Never earlier, never later. He would lock the door, but he would continue to hear the sound, as if it weren't coming from outside, but from inside the wood. It was the same rhythm his grandfather had mentioned in an old notebook found at the bottom of a drawer in the old house. 3 taps, always 3. He spent nights rereading that notebook where his grandfather described, in trembling handwriting, feeling a presence sit on the edge of the bed. "She has weight," one passage read, "the weight of someone who knows the house better than we do." Things worsened when he found an old box that had belonged to his father. Inside was a faded, black-and-white photograph. His father, as a child, sitting on the floor with a wooden toy in his hand. The photo seemed ordinary, but what chilled him to the bone was the lower right corner. A dark, slightly curved stain, as if a figure were trying to move away at the exact moment the photo was taken. It wasn't camera blur, it wasn't a tree shadow. It was identical to the silhouette he had seen on his bedroom door weeks before. It took him hours to breathe normally after the discovery. And it was that same night that the smell returned. The same damp, deep earth smell that his grandfather had described in 1958, that his father had smelled in the 1980s, and that now seeped into the wood of his bedroom door. It was as if the entity were clearly saying, "I am here. I have always been." A few nights later, something even stranger began to happen. He would wake up with the feeling of being watched, turn over in bed, and see the door ajar, even though he perfectly remembered closing it. On one of those nights, He got up with enough courage to walk to the living room, and it was there that he saw something he could never forget. On the carpet, there were small but long footprints, as if slender fingers had pressed into the fabric. They seemed like recent marks, leading from the front door to the hallway. He turned on all the lights in the house one by one with trembling hands, but the footprints simply vanished in the light, as if they couldn't bear to exist under bright light. That's when he found his father's second notebook, hidden inside a metal box in the attic. Inside was the answer to the question he had carried his whole life. Why did this entity only follow that lineage? In the notebook, written in hurried handwriting, his father left a statement that seemed to have been written during a night of despair. It's not persecution, it's not a curse, it's a memory. She doesn't follow us because she wants to. She follows us because she needs to. Our blood knows her. And name. Our blood saw something it shouldn't have, and until we remember what was seen, she won't go away. As he finished reading, a cold gust of wind swept through the attic. Impossible, since all the windows were locked, and the metal box fell to the floor on its own. He stood there, feeling the hairs on his body stand on end. It was a clear sign that the entity knew what he had just discovered. And that night, when he tried to sleep, he heard the voice for the first time, not a human sound, but a hoarse whisper coming from the exact same corner where his grandfather, his father, and now he had seen the figure bend. He said that after that night when he heard the first whisper, everything that had seemed strange before became inevitable. It was no longer a question of believing or not, it was a question of surviving. The sound came low, rough, as if something was trying to speak after a long time in silence. It wasn't a clear word, but a scratchy syllable made of air and memory. It came from the corner of the room, exactly from that angle where he always saw the silhouette forming. The whisper lasted less than a second, but the feeling it left clung to his chest as if someone had held his heart from the inside. He sat on the bed completely still, waiting for the silence to feel natural again. But it never did. Since that night, the silence in the house seemed heavy, as if it were filled with breaths that didn't belong to any living being. In the days that followed, the entity began to act more directly, almost as if it were communicating through the house, using objects as an extension of its presence. The television would turn on by itself, always on channels with no signal. Doors that were once silent began to make slow noises, not of creaking wood, but of something pushing from the other side. At times he felt the mattress sink as if someone was sitting next to him. At other times, when he walked down the hallway, he had the impression that smaller, lighter footsteps echoed behind his, but they always disappeared when he turned around. The smell of damp earth became constant, permeating the clothes, the fabrics, the pillow. It was as if the house had been partially transported to a place where the world was older, darker and quieter. He realized that the more he tried to ignore it, the stronger the presence became. That's when he decided to investigate everything he could. He searched through documents, old letters, religious records, stories from the farm where his grandfather lived. A pattern emerged, slow, painful, inevitable. All the manifestations began after a traumatic event experienced by the oldest member of the family. A trauma that wasn't talked about, wasn't remembered, wasn't recorded, but that left deep marks on the descendants. Grandpa never spoke about it, but there was a specific day he avoided mentioning. The day he found strange footprints near the barn, footprints too long to be human. His father also had a similar incident, a night when he disappeared for 2 hours as a child and returned covered in dust, unable to say where he had been. The more he read, the more he understood that he was dealing with something that wasn't haunting his family because it wanted to, but because it was inseparably linked to them, as if something had happened in the past that opened a door, and that door was never closed. He found, in a very old diary written by a great-grandfather, a sentence that left him breathless. Darkness doesn't choose, it recognizes. It was as if, at some point in their ancestry, someone had seen something, heard something, spoken to something that should never have been perceived by human eyes. And since then, this entity has followed the family, not as a curse, but as a continuation. One afternoon, while leafing through a folder of old documents in the attic, she found an envelope that appeared to have been opened and closed countless times. Inside was a yellowed piece of paper marked by trembling hands. It was a short but devastating account. Dad had written something down before he died. Don't ignore her when she tries to speak. Her name is the key, but if you say it too loudly, she'll come in. He read that sentence repeatedly, his heart racing. Everything made sense. His grandfather avoided talking about it because he was afraid to repeat the name. His father slept with the door locked because he feared that, in his dreams, he might say something that would allow the entity to enter more deeply. And he was beginning to hear the same whisper that had accompanied 3 generations before him. That same night, as he tried to fall asleep, he heard the whisper again, clearer this time, closer, almost brushing his ear. The entity no longer wanted just to be seen. It wanted to be heard, and worse, it wanted to be answered. He felt the bed tremble slightly, as if something had brushed against the mattress. The cold became unbearable, and the smell of earth seemed to emanate from the sheet, as if the entity were sitting there, awaiting a reaction. He squeezed his eyes shut, but it was useless. The silhouette formed in the darkness, bending as it always did. And this time, it spoke again, clearly, intentionally, with memory. Something inside him told me not to answer. Something said that if I repeated that syllable, everything would change permanently. But at the same time, the voice had something familiar about it, something that sounded as if it came from within the lineage itself, like an inheritance that no one asked for, but that everyone received. It was a feeling impossible to explain, deep fear mixed with recognition. And that morning, he finally understood the pattern. The entity wasn't trying to destroy them. It was trying to continue what it began with the first member of the family, a silent, accidental pact, sealed in the dark, that was never broken. He said that last night, the night he finally confronted the entity. Didn't begin with fright, noise, or a shadow crossing the hallway. It began with silence, a silence so impeccable it seemed constructed so that nothing but the presence could exist within the house. There was no wind, no sound of pipes, no ticking of the clock. Even his own breathing seemed restrained, as if it were forbidden to disturb what was about to happen. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hands clasped, trying to find the courage not to run. But run where? He already knew after weeks, months, perhaps years of noticing the pattern that the presence wasn't confined to the room. It was confined to him. And that night it was closer than ever. It was exactly at 3:13 that the air changed. It didn't get cold like before. It didn't vibrate. It didn't feel heavy. It just changed, as if someone had crossed the threshold without making a sound. He felt it before he saw it. First on his arms, where the hairs stood on end as if pulled by invisible fingers. Then on the nape of his neck, where a sensation of heat and cold mingled in a tremor impossible to interpret. And then the voice, finally clear, finally whole, spoke exactly behind him, as if glued to his skin. "You remember." He turned slowly, afraid of fainting mid-movement. The figure was there, for the first time fully formed, completely clear, completely present. It wasn't too tall like in the old photo, nor hunched over like on his grandfather's farm, nor just a dense shadow like in his father's childhood. It was all these forms at once, as if adjusting its appearance according to the memories of each generation it had visited. The entity seemed made of layers of ancient darkness, molded into a human outline, but just enough to be recognizable. The rest was something that didn't belong to any physical logic. Darker parts moved within it, like smoke trapped in glass. He couldn't speak. His voice wouldn't come out. The presence seemed to control the space between them, as if the distance itself were its own decision. When the entity took a step closer, the lamp dimmed on its own, as if it had been drained, and for the first time he smelled a scent he had never smelled before, but which he recognized instantly: hot iron, wet earth, and burnt wood. The smell his grandfather had described, the smell his father couldn't explain, the smell that had been on his clothes since the first night. Then she spoke again. 3 saw, 3 heard, 3 forgot. He swallowed hard, because that explained everything. His grandfather saw it, his father heard it, he forgot and then remembered. The entity didn't haunt him, it accompanied him. It was as if each generation had received an incomplete part of a story that needed to be told in its entirety, as if the presence was trying to restore something that had been broken decades ago, something that no one in that family ever understood. It was then that the entity raised its hand, slowly, almost human. The darkness within it moved like black water, rising up a tree trunk, and the instant that arm drew near, he saw the missing memory, not his own memory, but an inherited memory, buried so deep that hardly any human being could access it without help. He saw a boy, very much like himself but younger. He saw this boy running through the old farm, frightened, pursued by something that human eyes shouldn't see. He saw the grandfather, young, carrying this boy in his arms, desperate, repeating, don't look at her." He saw the entity, outside the house, on the other side of the window, watching the two of them with silent curiosity, and he saw, for just a second, the exact moment when the boy looked into the eyes, or what should have been the eyes, of the entity. Just 1 second, but enough to open it within the lineage, enough to create the link, enough to ensure that the presence would never leave. The vision vanished, as if it had been cut from the inside, and he returned to the room. The entity was still there, closer, denser, clearer. He tried to whisper, "What do you want?" The response was so gentle, so human, that he felt his whole body tremble. "I don't want anything. I just don't want to be forgotten." And then she did something that none of the previous generations had witnessed. She took a step back. She didn't disappear. She didn't dissolve. She just retreated, as if to show that she no longer needed to go so deep, because finally someone had understood. Finally, someone had remembered. The next morning, when he woke up, the room was normal. The door was closed. The house was silent. The smell of earth had vanished. But on the floor, exactly where the entity had stopped before retreating, there was a thin mark on the baseboard. Not a claw, not a scratch, but a soft trace, like a signature left in a hidden corner. He lives to this day with the certainty that the presence hasn't gone away. It will never go away, because it's not tied to a house, but to a memory, to a lineage, to a forbidden look a boy gave almost 70 years ago, and since then all it wants is to be remembered. Now tell me, you who are listening to this story, have you ever felt something that seemed too old to be just fear? Have you ever felt a presence that seemed to know your family better than you do? Comment below. Describe what you've experienced. I want to know if this story resonated with you, or if you're already living your own.